The Paternal Metaphor I, Part 3 of 4. The relationship, let's take the boy to start with, between the child and the father is ordered, to be sure, by the fear of castration. This fear of castration, what is it? How, from which side can we approach it? To start with, in the first experience of the Oedipus complex, in the form of what? Of a retaliation. I mean that it is from the interior of an aggressive relationship, insofar as this aggression comes from the child, the boy, insofar as his privileged object, the mother, is forbidden to him. It is insofar as the aggression is directed towards the father that the child, hence on the imaginary level in the dual relationship, as long as he imaginatively projects into the father the aggressive intentions, equivalent or reinforced in relation to his own, but of which the starting point is his own aggressive tendencies. In short, the fear experienced when facing the father is clearly centrifugal. I mean that it has its centre in the subject. This conforms to both clinical experience and the history of psychoanalysis. It's from this angle that very quickly clinical experience has taught us in what terms the impact of the fear felt in the Oedipus complex in relation to the father must be taken. Hence, castration insofar as, on the one hand, it is profoundly linked to the symbolic articulation of the prohibition of incest. On the other hand, and at the forefront of our whole practice, much more, naturally, with those who are the privileged objects of it, i.e. neurotics, it is something that manifests itself on the imaginary level, where it has its beginning there. That is not a commandment type of beginning, i.e., as the laws of Manu say, whoever sleeps with his mother must cut off his genitals and, holding them in his hand, right or left, I don't remember exactly, must walk directly westwards until he falls down dead. That's the law. But this has not especially well reached the ears of our neurotics as such. It is even in general rather left in the shade. There are other ways to get out of it elsewhere, but I haven't got the time to expand on it today. Hence, it is linked to the imaginary aggression of the subject. The way in which the neurosis is incarnated, this castrational threat, is itself a retaliation. As long as Jupiter is completely capable of castrating Kronos, our little Jupiters fear that Kronos will start the job himself. And so there is something else that the examination of the Oedipus complex teaches us from the beginning. I mean in the way that it is articulated, presented through experience, through theory, through Freud. It is the delicate question of the inverted Oedipus complex. I don't know if that seems to go without saying to you, but read the article by Freud or any article by any author. Every time the question of the Oedipus complex is raised, one is always struck by the extremely moving, nuanced, disconcerting role that is played by the function of the inverted Oedipus complex. This inverted Oedipus complex is never absent from the function of the Oedipus complex. I mean that the component of love for the father cannot be eluded. It's that this is what gives an ending to the Oedipus complex, the decline of the Oedipus complex. That it is in a dialectic that remains very ambiguous between love and identification, i.e., as identification taking its root in love. Whilst not at all being the same thing, it's not the same thing, nevertheless the two terms are tightly linked and absolutely indissociable. Read Freud's article on the dissolution of the Oedipus complex. In the explanation that he gives of the terminal identification that is its solution, it is insofar as the father is loved that the subject identifies himself with him and that he finds the solution, the ending of the Oedipus complex. On the one hand, this setting up of repression through amnesia. On the other hand, this acquisition in himself of this ideal term thanks to which he will become a father. He can himself also become someone who, I'm not saying already and immediately, is a little male, who, if I may say so, already has his title in his pocket, something in reserve. When the time comes, if things turn out well, if the little pigs don't eat him, at the time of puberty he has his penis already with its certificate. Daddy is there to confer it on me at the right time. It does not happen like that if neurosis breaks out, because there is precisely something that is not regular about the title in question. Except that the inverted Oedipus complex is not so simple. It's through this root and this root of love that the properly speaking inverted position can be produced, i.e. that the subject also finds himself by the same route, on occasions given over not to a beneficial identification, but to a good and brave little passive position on the unconscious level. That will also make its reappearance at the right time, meaning that it will put him in the kind of bisectrix of the angle or squeeze panic that will mean that he finds himself taken over by a position that he has discovered on his own and which is very advantageous. This father who is fearsome, who has forbidden so many things but who is elsewhere very kind, it is to put oneself in the right place to receive his favours, meaning to make oneself loved by him. But as making oneself loved by him consists in initially passing over to the rank of a woman, and that one still keeps one's little virile pride, this is what Freud explains to us. To make oneself lovable to the father entails the danger of castration. Hence, this unconscious form of homosexuality that puts the subject in this essentially conflictual position with multiple repercussions, and that is, on the one hand, always returning to the homosexual position in relation to the father, on the other hand, the suspension of what it entails, meaning its repression because of the threat of castration. All that is not simply simple-minded, and yet what we are trying to do is to tackle something that will allow us to conceptualize it in a more rigorous way. Something that will entail that we will then be able, in each observation and in each particular case, to ask our question in a better and more rigorous way. Hence, to summarize, as in a minute the summary is going to consist in introducing a certain number of distinctions that, I think, are the prelude to the centering of the point that does not work. In a minute we will have already approached this, that it is there, around the ego ideal, that the question has not been posed. Here, to reduce the task of what we have just remembered and addressed, I propose this to you. Already I think that it is not too much to come out and say that the father all the same comes in the position of a hinderer, not simply troublesome by his scale, but in the position of a hinderer because he forbids. What does he forbid? Let's look at it again and make a distinction. To start with, he forbids the real satisfaction of a drive. If we have to bring the emergence of the genital drive into the equation, the fact is that it is not there, since it turns up and intervenes a lot earlier. But it is also clear that something is articulated around the fact that he forbids the little child to make use of his penis, and at the moment when said penis begins to manifest what we will call its inclinations. This is the relation of the father's prohibition in the locus of the real drive. Let's straight away make a remark at this level. Why the father? Experience shows that the mother does it just as much. Remember the observation of little Hans. The mother says to him, "Put that away, you mustn't do that." And even more, it's more often the mother that says, "If you carry on doing that, we will call the doctor who will cut it off." Hence, take good note of what happens. It's that the father, as prohibiting at the level of the real drive, is not essential. So, if you remember my table from last year, you see, they always end up being useful. Look again at what I presented to you. The table with the 3 stages: castration, frustration, privation. What is it about? Let me draw your attention to it. Hence, it is about the father's real intervention concerning what? An imaginary threat. For it is very clear that it pretty rarely happens that he really cuts it off. Hence, we clearly find exactly what happens at the level of the threat of castration. I want you to take note that castration is a symbolic act, the agent of which is someone real, the father or the mother, who says to him, "Do you want me to cut it off?" and of which the object is an imaginary object. If the child feels cut, it is by imagining it. Whereas, I want you to take note of it, this is paradoxical, because you could say to me, that is properly speaking the level of castration, and you are telling us that the father is not of much use here. That is what I am saying, but yes. On the other hand, what does he prohibit, the father? Ah, well, the point where we started from, i.e. the mother as object. She belongs to him. She does not belong to the child. It is in this phase that is established, at one step at least, with the boy just as with the girl, this rivalry with the father that alone engenders aggression. Is that the father does indeed frustrate the child in relation to the mother. Here is another step, another stage, if you like. I want you to take note that here the father intervenes as having the right and not as a real person. i.e., that even if he is not there, if he calls the mother on the phone, for example, the result is the same. It is the father, as symbolic in this context, who intervenes in frustration, an imaginary act concerning here a very real object, which is the mother insofar as the child needs her. Then there is the third term that intervenes in this articulation of the Oedipus complex, which is the father insofar as he is made preferable to the mother. For this dimension, you are absolutely forced to make him intervene according to the final function, in that which leads to the formation of the ego ideal. It is insofar as the father becomes, through whichever way that it happens, either through strength or weakness, an object that is preferable to the mother, that the terminal identification will be able to become established. The question of the inverted Oedipus complex and its function establishes itself at this level. I would go further. It is precisely here that the crucial question about the difference in effect of the complex on the boy and the girl is centered. It is very clear that at this level here, everything falls into place for the one who is the girl. And it's for this reason that we say that the castration complex function is asymmetric for the boy and for the girl. For the girl, it is from the beginning that this question is of importance, and at the end that it facilitates the solution. Because the father has no trouble in being made preferable to the mother as bearer of the phallus. For the boy, it is another story, and, as you can see, it is always there that the gap remains open. I.e., that in order to be made preferable to the mother, as it is through this that the outcome to the Oedipus complex is produced, we find ourselves faced with the same difficulty as in the inception of the inverted Oedipus complex. And it does seem to us that for the boy, the Oedipus complex must always be, and in every case, the least normalizing thing, even though it is all the same implicated as the most normalizing thing, since it is via this identification with the father that in the end we are told that virility is assumed. In the end, the problem is to know how it happens that this father, who is essentially a prohibitor, does not end up as this in what is very clearly the conclusion to the third phase, i.e., that it is insofar as the ideal identification arises, that the father becomes the ego ideal, that something arises. Something that is what? That in every case tends to be for the boy as it is for the girl. But for the girl, what is good is that she recognizes that she does not have the phallus, whereas for the boy, this would be an absolutely disastrous outcome, and sometimes it is. In other terms, what we end up centering as the moment of the normalizing outcome of the Oedipus complex generates at a point and in a relation such that the imaginary goes to the real, goes to the symbolic. Meaning that the child recognizes not having chosen. He has not really chosen what he has, let me tell you. What happens at the level of the ideal identification, the level where the father is preferred to the mother, the essential point and the exit point of the Oedipus complex, is something that must literally end up with privation, so that all this is entirely eligible and entirely conformity making. Even though this is never completely achieved with the woman as an outcome of the Oedipus complex, because for her it always leaves this slight aftertaste, what is called penis envy, that hence proves that it does not really work rigorously. But in the case where that should work, if we go by this schema, the boy, he should always be neutered. There is, therefore, something that does not add up, something missing from our explanation.